When I look back at myself at that time, I'm just about able to see another person altogether. I never completely left the classical approach to drawing and painting. I felt that an artist needed to be able to describe the world with a pencil and ultimately a paintbrush in an interpretive way, but also in a journalistic way. I was consumed with Marcel Duchamp, and then I was seeing the imagery in Robert Rauschenberg's constructions, and the relationship between images created action and motion and movement, not only within the picture plane, but within the dynamic of meaning. And it got to be that just living, just walking down the street, anything I saw meant something else. I saw it as a component in larger philosophies and perspectives. Psyche as a vault of great depth, let's say limitless. You know, you start becoming familiar with the mental state of a madman. And I invited that into my life at an early age. But I had physical composure and strength from competing, so I was able to sustain this apparently mad head. I knew I could run. You know, I was arrogant about it. I was getting fit and strong and from running, and I was adding mileage training into this life as a young budding artist. My life became a composition of training and distance running and studying art and creating. And I found out what oxygen debt meant. In other words, where you're not breathing in enough air to supply to your muscles for the speed that you're running, something happens to your brain. You're looking straight ahead. Your mind is gushing forward ideas and images. You're seeing them in your eye. rectangles with pieces moving and images. And different forms of symmetry started entering my mind. Bilateral, radial symmetry, rotational symmetry, which were really just the contents of the human psyche, which we all have, but I was able to excavate them and use them as a motif or a format to create paintings. Every morning my mother prodded me in the direction of literature and the American poets and the American authors who she was most familiar with. And in my bloodstream was flowing an obsession with visual form. I think one part of my mind craved something definitive because I was embarking on a journey where everything was subjective. I felt that art needed to be not only of a symbolist nature, but it needed to be animated, physically animated. That is, moving, lit up, and it needed to compete with life itself. I can never leave this period when my sensibility was born. I have great allegiance to it. I mean, even with that milieu of symbols that I embraced, whether it was elements of architecture, elements of machinery, the human anatomy, the arbitrary detritus of life, the cracks in the sidewalks, the items from the junk heap, I could transform them into my work because there was a context for them. I had this mentality of everything is in. This watch, Dad, you gave to me. I was sitting in your bedroom in the chair next to you. I was admiring it, and you said, Robbie, how'd you like to have this watch? And that was 12 years ago.
Where did I get it?
And you got it as a gift from Dr. Pasco, who thought he was giving you the state-of-the-art timepiece, and he was at the time. And as in the case of other gifts that you've got. My primary role models were my father and his brothers, and then the guys that worked for my dad. So I had guys to look up to that were capable and they were heroic. You know, my uncles, my father all went to war and came back, you know, and in the different branches of the service too. Army, Navy, my Uncle Vince was in the Marines. Next to my father, my greatest hero was my Uncle Vince. Taught me how to fish and how to be a man. But my mind was evolving in a way that theirs weren't and wouldn't, because I was a product of my generation and I was so stimulated by everything I discovered through literature and art that I was moving away from my father's orientation of design and industry and professional success in this quantifiable and recognizable way. And he started viewing my creations. And as a parent, you know what's going on in your son's mind. I was out of control and out of touch. Things were going to change. New York was calling me. The dream, the fantasy, you know, and it was the home to the beatnik poets, and it was the city where the art world was, and that the New York school was located, you know, Rauschenberg and Johns and Larry Rivers. And these people that I admired. But I didn't have much money and I had no friends here. So it was just a matter of pulling the arrow back and letting it go. And eventually I did in November 1977. So I left Chicago.
This is the sound of a carnival of vegetables that's been playing every night in New York for over 100 years. The Midway is Old Washington Market, and the time is midnight.
Tribeca used to be called, until I think the mid-'80s, the Washington Market. It was called the Washington Market because it was the largest food market in, I think, in the United States for a long period of time. It went from probably Barclay Street downtown all the way up to 14th Street, and every few blocks had a different market. This particular market was the butter, egg, and cheese market on this street. Being in these buildings was not easy. This building, when I moved into it, it was loaded with junk and garbage, and from one end to the other. So you had to have skills in order. Most people couldn't afford to hire a plumber, so you learned to do plumbing yourself, which is what I did, or learn to be an electrician on your own. Rob came in 1977, and because of a peculiar reason, which I related to you before, that I was a little pissed off that he wound up moving in on the ground floor, because my father and I had intended to buy the building, but it didn't work out that way. But we got past that very quickly. And Rob's been a good neighbor for a very long time, for 30, let me do the arithmetic here, almost 40 years.
So much philosophical and cultural history for me came from New York. And the fantasy of the place was so great in my mind for so many years as a young man back in the Midwest that I fed off that fantasy even when I got here. My perceptions of it, my feelings about it were far greater and more useful than the place itself. I moved in there and I started creating some of the most intense, gorgeous stuff I've ever done. And many people I know to this day say it's some of my best work. It really is very painful for me to talk about these pictures, because they were the essence of my being. Everything I have as a man, as an artist, went into creating this. And there's no place in the world for them. It was a genre that nobody had seen before. And they were intended to both attract you and repulse you, because I couldn't let art become so sweet. It needed to be equally severe. The truth is not pretty. It's not nice. It's raw, and it is what it is. And those were my constructions. They were painted. They were sprayed. They were the inside of my consciousness. It was me turned inside out. And these symbols and these subjects were presented in the most imaginable way possible. They were carved or they were found, and they were integrated, and they were just something to behold. They were self-critical, and they were critical of the world, but they loved the world also. But in general, the consuming audience wants wants pretty, wants beautiful from art. And these works were not pretty. They were severe. And then a time came when I had to completely turn my back on them or else not survive and not make it as an artist. It was very difficult. Fortunately, I have, I would say, 5 major works from that period in storage in my studio. A few have been sold. And I consider them very significant and very precious. Suddenly it was winter. I was fairly depressed, and if you remember the winters in the early 80s, they were pretty severe. Tribeca was a cold and lonely place. I had my cat, and that was it. And one evening, in the midst of my lowest point maybe ever, my future wife walks through the door, and the rest is history. What exploded me into this series of works was the trip I took to Venice with Helena in 1988.
It's a series of them. I happen to own the last one. I think it's a self-portrait where you also once again have a posture which is very, very unique and which is very hard to capture. What really attracts me in the Amiss and the Abyss is that there's so much going on which you discover over time. You can't see it the first time. You have to live with a painting to really discover new features in it. And it feels like there's a lot of motion in that picture. It's almost like it's not a picture, it's just like an atmosphere which is moving, which is truly amazing.
Something caught my eye out the doorway. It was a guy who was dressed in a Venetian carnival clown outfit, a harlequin look, very multicolored. He seemed to be Amiss, but certainly so was I. And the Abyss was the whole time and space realm that I wanted to go to and to take the viewer with me. And with a paintbrush, he was throwing paint into the Abyss as I might as an artist.
We searched through his collection at, for me, 3 parties, and we were hunting for something that would fit that bill of making us feel good. And when we saw Amiss in the Abyss, we saw this jester, and we saw this beautiful color. And for me, it was the freedom of splashing the color and the infinite possibilities that are out there in life.
Both of us fell in love with it, and we said, oh, you know, that's something that we could have as part of our lives and as a symbol of what life is for us, because we enjoy our art. We look at our art a lot, all the time. We have it with us to remind us what's important in life. And this painting is something that's very important to us because it symbolizes that joie de vivre.
March 1988. And it was the first major piece that I did from Venice, and in many ways the technique in this one is really nice. It might be because the subject is so nice. I think that's it.
The light from the blue Venetian sky with the red tile roofs reflecting into it made it look yellow at the edges of the horizon, and the light bouncing off the water, and then the deep algae green of the water, the crumbling brick from the middle centuries in Venice. I was completely consumed. I entered into that space and time like this whole thing was set up to happen.
He's done things Rob's way. That's who he is. He's like a Frank Sinatra guy, I did it my way. And he absolutely did. And the great thing is he keeps doing it. You know, this is his heart. It's who he is. And it's always been who he is, in the face of great opposition. From his family, from his contemporaries, but he just keeps going. He has this tremendous ability to persevere, as I said before. And then you don't see that often in many people. Something that I've seen Rob do a lot is where he'll do a line over and over and over and over and over and over and over until he gets it the way he wants it. I think, if I remember correctly, that's something that Lautrec did also.
The subjects from Venice were a little more romantic, and when I got back to New York, it really became about the hero. I wanted to fashion him with costume that would suggest to the viewer the times past, to help him enter into a period of time out of the one that he's in. I wanted to create a picture plane that he fell into the landscape. It would have a depth at his foot and a depth in the horizon, and in the middle of it would be this creature, this being, this heroic entity who I would beg of the viewer to try to understand and unravel and find intrigue with. And as I learned, the hero hidden in a costume is the artist. The artist is the universal being that's traveled through time, who we seem to rely on to tell us maybe the only things we really can believe. Putting a man in the middle of a painting, the painting being natural, it's an emphatic endorsement I don't know, I think of man's best instincts, which are heroic. Be a hero for one another, whether that's leadership or some kind of salvation. And I think deeply I felt that about an artist at the top of his game. That's what an artist does. He leads without a weapon. And in this case, he leads without a word. And eventually I opened up a gallery, a commercial gallery here, where I showed only Tribeca artists, named Neo Persona Gallery, and that was in 1984. And one of the real estate developers here, whom I built lofts for, became my partner and helped me fund the gallery. The painting millennium changed my life. It defined for me what was capable. The architecture allows me to bring New York into the pictures. And I've painted New York in maybe 20 times in my life, and I've done it in a grand and heroic style, I would say 4 to 5 times. And one thing I have learned about how to paint New York is that you have to paint the design of the buildings responsibly. In other words, you have to understand the period they came from and the intent of the designers, which conveys the mood of society. Because New York is a place which embodied the hopes and dreams of the world, certainly of America, and its illusions and its needs still does.
I think that Robert also tries to manifest his own architectures or his own sense of architectural space, with some of his kind of like hybrid, forms. Sometimes you see a figure and you don't always know whether it's meant to be a specific person or a symbol, a sense of totemic space, totemic forms, whether they're skyscrapers or monuments or symbolic figures, or people, always kind of reoccurring in his paintings. I think that he's also engaged in a conversation with history. And when I say history, I don't just mean art history, I mean world history. And so if he brings in an Egyptian figure or a sphinx or something, it's intentional. I mean, he's not just using a symbol, he is engaging with a sense of space created by that figure.
Try to reach the human heart. That's the most difficult thing to do, and it's the greatest of all ambitions for an artist. That's why I adore Van Gogh. When I see a Van Gogh in a museum, I immediately get on my knees and thank him for all that he gave us, all that I have learned.
Rob, this is November 3rd, the day of your opening.
Gallery's this way, Dad.
Okay, heading that way.
I was becoming obsessed with who is this guy. And you've seen his costumes, you've seen the form that he took, but have you seen his flesh? Have you seen his body? You've seen the agony of being knocked down and getting up and still being an artist the next day. So I went into my studio and I took the cap from the Jester and the Amiss and the Abyss. I put it on my head. I took my clothes off and I decided I'm going to paint the artist. And I painted him fast and I painted him expressively. And I didn't know or care if anything was going to come of it. I just felt it had to happen. It was an about face that might have lasted for 24 hours, or it might have lasted for the rest of time. I didn't know, I didn't care. I was stripping down. I still wanted the truth. And I turned 30 of them over to the gallery in the course of the next year and a half. And occasionally I painted one larger on canvas, but they were all works on paper. The gallery was selling them as fast as I could make them, and they didn't even want to see anything else. They had paintings of mine that were on the rack. They weren't being shown from the pictorial series. And there was an opening, and I was telling a collector about it, and got back to the dealer, and she was very unhappy, and we had a falling out. And that was it.
I don't know this woman, but I've heard other stories that are similar to his, and I can just imagine, her indifference to him and her need to push out saleable product, because that's what kind of the art world became known of in the 80s and 90s was product. You were going to make the same sort of paintings for 10, 15 years, and they were going to sell the hell out of them, and you only had one gallery.
I was so upset that I took a razor blade and I cut the canvas in 10 pieces. But when I cut it along lines that my eyes saw. They fell on the ground. I picked them up. I was a wreck. I was a mess. I could barely function. And a couple of days later, I took the pieces and I started looking at them, thinking, wow, it'd be nice if I could see them three-dimensionally. But they were still me. I wanted to get away from me. have a powerful feeling rumbling up in my soul, I try not to fully understand it because I give myself to it, because if you don't let your conscious mind get in the way too much, then your unconscious mind opens up and it comes through from a deeper space. Toward the end of the pictorial works, where I was trying to define the hero, I had been studying the costuming from cultures that I was fascinated by, and one of them was by a Japanese printmaker named Yoshitoshi. I saw a particular print of a female who was committing suicide, killing herself, jumping into an icy pond to restore the name of her father's name, which I then painted on canvas. And for the first time, I created a piece which I was going to intentionally cut up. And although homage to Yoshitoshi, I took it from there and did my own version. At that time, I was in the process of renovating my loft and living area. My children were getting bigger. They needed their own rooms. My wife needed a new kitchen. So I had my whole place torn apart, but I stopped to build a crate to put these pictures in. And the day that the truck came to pick up the 2 crated paintings was September 10th, 2001. There was no recovery from 9/11. There was no hope, and there was no way to gain hope. When you walked out the door and you looked up, the sky was full of smoke and black soot for 3 months. It never stopped. You were risking walking down the street without a respirator on. People left their homes and they didn't come back. Everybody was depressed. There was fire trucks stacked up on the corner for months that had been crushed and demolished. The schools didn't reopen for weeks. People were scared, paranoid. We were just figuring out that it was bin Laden and his pals that did it. The euro in Europe was strong, much stronger than the dollar. So the Europeans were coming around and hanging out on the sidewalk and speaking different languages and looking at us like we were caged monkeys. There was no way to recover. I couldn't feel anything. The things that make me function as an artist, the love, the curiosity, the intrigue, they weren't there. I couldn't look into the past because it was black. It was a wall. And then in the spring, I had been spending an unusual amount of time in bar rooms, doing what you do in bar rooms, trying to forget what you do during the day. And I started watching people and watching women in particular, and I saw that they had a greater rotation of moods and feelings than men did. And even though I kind of knew this, I felt that this was my next subject. So I started bringing a small sketchbook with me. And when you draw from life and the subject isn't modeling, you have to draw fast. So you're drawing in a way which is like a person taking shorthand or stenography. And before I knew it, I had 20, 30, 40 really good drawings. I was ready to paint. So about a year after 9/11, I took those sketches and I started painting women.
name of the painting is Rapunzel.
We wanted something that would be striking and would set a tone for our new home. And this was the first piece of art that we bought for the living room. And we thought that it achieved exactly what we wanted in creating a tone and an elegance to the apartment that we built around over time.
This was a part of a new series that he did. I think he did 4 or 6 of them, I'm not sure. This was one of them. And I think it's also one of Rob's favorites, so But we fell in love with it as soon as we saw it. I was mesmerized by the color of it because I'm a big fan of turquoise. I love turquoise.
We were very, very happy with the result. We liked the theme. We liked the classic theme of the ballerina. We liked the earth colors of the dark brown, purple, some tan. We liked the anatomical features of the body and the three-dimensional quality of it, which really catches the attention.
One stroke coming just, the way he did it. Just like the way he did this. I mean, I think he started with the arm and just went from there to here and then like this.
Mango will change his entire style of painting. And we find ourselves admiring the new styles of painting and often trailing behind them in terms of what we like, and then perhaps catching up to him later on in terms of what he's currently doing.
I am always going to be gracious to a female subject. I'm always going to make her seductive, intriguing. Even if she's silly, it's going to be in an appreciative way. And this is so outside of political correctness and feminism and everything like that. It's about man and woman, and it's about woman and woman. And women know when they look at those paintings, yeah, that's us, that's me. I want to be that. I was that. I know how to be that way.
And in Rob's work, you can actually see over time how he has evolved as an artist. And Rob is very experimental. And I think currently is using the best of all those experiments over 40 years to, I think, bring out some of his best work ever.
During this period of time, my mother died, to whom I have the greatest indebtedness and to whom I will always be so in love with and I feel so dependent on for the sensibilities that I exist with as an artist. And at that moment, I stopped being interested in painting physical bodies. The next painting I did, I created a figure, somewhat dark and shadowy on top of the super flat background, and I enriched it with a line that ran through it that became the spirit within. I mean, it was a childish, inept attempt, but it worked. what I have waiting. It's a lady in waiting. Maybe I should name it Lady in Waiting. Right? This brings me almost up to the present of where I'm at now. And my perspective going forward is to actually bring up to date all of my major motifs. I am abandoning none of them. And I was torn away from my 3D paintings at the death of my mother, where I just felt compulsed to paint pictures that enabled the human spirit graphically and visibly. But I feel that my 3D paintings are an invention unlike anything in contemporary art. And they grasp the very important poles which I work between, which are the great European heritage of chiaroscuro, contrapposto, and the dynamics of the human figure, the pathos of the figure, its legacy in our cultures, and the other pole being the vitality of the American hand and mark-making tradition in painting and drawing. Thank you, Guillaume.